Today's question is, who is my neighbour? Born and raised in Montego Bay, Jamaica, when she was 18, my guest travelled to the UK to train for ministry in the Church Army. Since then, her life has been punctuated by a series of firsts. In 1994, she was one of the first women in the UK to be ordained an Anglican priest. Subsequently, she became the first black woman to be appointed as a chaplain to Her Majesty the Queen, the first woman to become the chaplain to the Speaker of the House of Commons, and in 2019 she was consecrated as the Church of England's first black female bishop. She has taken part in the wedding of Harry and Meghan and in the coronation service of King Charles and Queen Camilla. As well as serving in the royal household and at the Palace of Westminster, she has spent years working in inner city parishes in the West Midlands and in London. And here to speak to me today is the Bishop of Dover, the Right Reverend Rose Hudson-Wilkin. Bishop Rose, welcome. It's so lovely to see you.
Hello, good to be with you.
Thank you. Bishop Rose, let's take you back a few years, not too many, a few years to when you were 18. How and why did you get involved in church ministry?
I often refer to myself as a cradle Anglican. So I was 3 months when I was baptized in the church in Jamaica. And we were lucky not to have a priest every week. And what that
that's a blessing in some churches.
And what that meant was that the local lay reader, elderly man, didn't just hog the show and thought, great, this is my time to show them what I'm made of. What he did was to include the children and young people in the service. Yeah. And so at a very early age, I was reading lessons in church, doing intercessions when we were able to understand how to do that well, and preached my first sermon at 14 years old.
Do you remember the text?
I do indeed.
Oh, come on then.
It was Psalm 8. What is man that thou art mindful of him?
Wonderful. Yeah, that's a big text.
Oh, it is a big text. Yeah. And so I was, during that time, I remember this overwhelming sense of feeling that I am being called to ministry. All the readings in relation to calling just sort of lit up every time we came near to them. Yeah. You know, Jeremiah, I'm only a child. I can't. No, don't say you're only a child, girl. I'm calling you. Yeah. Isaiah, here I am, send me. Yeah. Amos, I'm not a preacher or a preacher's son, but I'll do the preaching until the preacher comes.
Yeah. And that sounds like it still excites you now.
Oh, it does. Yes.
So it wasn't just a teenage fantasy. It wasn't just somebody in naivety thinking that they were going to change the world or that God was speaking to them or wanting to use them. This was something which is at a much more profound level.
Oh yes. And even when my bishop said to me, Rose, we're Anglicans, we don't do that. I remember, as a child, you don't sort of speak back to the adults and say, absolutely. But in my heart, I remember thinking, you may not do that. The church may not do that, but I know God does that because God has called me. So 14, I was 33 when the church said yes to women priests.
Yeah. I think if anybody was listening closely to my introduction, you might just have given your age away. Let's move on. Look, you're, as I say in the intro, your calling, I won't say career, your calling has been punctuated by a succession of firsts. Now, there's a saying, isn't there, that says, I cannot be what I cannot see. Now, if you had no role models by virtue of being first at a number of things, how have you become who and what you are today?
I think it is fair to say that my faith has been a real foundation. Learning in Sunday school about a God that loved me unconditionally was massive. My mother had left Jamaica and she came to the UK. My sister and I, we were left behind. There was a time when I felt really unloved. and somehow learning about this God of love was just so amazing that I thought, yeah, this it connected with me. And so growing up also in Jamaica, you saw images of yourself in terms of Black people, on the cover of books, in the high street, on the adverts board, all of those things. But actually, interestingly, no women in leadership roles, ordained leadership roles within the church. We were in the church. We opened the church, we closed the church, we cooked, we cleaned, we did everything.
Yeah.
We were just not allowed behind the altar.
Yeah.
And so even though I didn't see that, I saw it. There's that song. Unfortunately, the writer and singer of the song is out of love because of his behavior, but it doesn't take away from the words of the song. If I could just see it, then I will believe it. So the song, I Believe I Can Fly.
Yeah.
So you envision it, because God has placed this on your heart. And if you can see it, then you will believe it, and then you will do what you need to do, and pray that God will do his bit as well.
Now, in turn then, do you see yourself as a role model for young women, for young Black women?
I don't know whether I see myself in that role, or whether it is that others see me in that role.
Yeah.
So time and time again, people have said to me, I remember a young Asian woman telling me that she was at a crossroads in her life, and wondering, God, what should I do? And then she said, I came on the television, and she remembered thinking, if she can do that, I can do that too.
Yeah.
And she's now ordained.
There you go. Job done. The word spreads. Now, Bishop Rose, our question tonight is, who is my neighbour? Now, when Jesus was asked this originally, he replied by telling the parable of the Good Samaritan. Do you see, are there any lessons that you gleaned from that story, that are appropriate today?
Some major lessons springs up from that story of the Good Samaritan. For me, that story speaks about compassion. It speaks about mercy. It speaks about being countercultural. It speaks about someone least expected rising to the occasion. It speaks about not being tied to the letter of the law, but actually allowing the Holy Spirit to say, go with the flow of the wind. And we get the story of the Good Samaritan.
And as just said, it was, you used the word countercultural, and in fact it was countercultural in Jesus' day, wasn't it? Because the culture was, we are this group and they are that group, and we never meet. In fact, they used to, biblical history tells us they used to go out of their way to avoid each other. When Jesus is with the woman at the well, who is a Samaritan, you Jews have nothing to do with us Samaritans. Now that feeling was mutual.
Yes. How come you're talking to me?
Yeah, exactly. Surely, you with your extensive ministry in the UK, do you see parallels where there is division within our society today in such sort of necessary, people deciding they must keep their distance from others?
Oh, loads and loads of parallels, and in particular, at the moment we see it. It's flashing before our very eyes. Somebody told us, we're not born to say that's a Jew, that's a Samaritan, that person is Black, that one's white, Irish, English. We're not born with that. We learn it. Somebody teaches us to behave in that way. Someone teaches us to other another group, and we see it being played out, and we do it in a way that is almost political, and it's a class thing. We saw it with Brexit.
Yeah.
where we are taught how bad the others are,
Yeah.
and hence why we need to separate ourselves from them and come out of, that union, as it
Yeah.
were.
Yeah.
And it is, we do ourselves a great disservice. Yes, when we follow that and not think for ourselves. In the summary of the law, Lord Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. But it's the mind. We've got a mind, for goodness sake. Let's use it. Let's not just believe what other people say. Let's question and challenge and do the right thing.
Now, in a speech you gave, I think it was last year, to mark Black History Month, you described yourself as a descendant of enslaved people. Now, a few years ago, following the tragedy that brought about the Black Lives Matter campaign, we then saw pulling down of statues. We saw Premier League footballers taking a knee before all the games. Are such movements more than well-meaning gestures, do you think?
I think such gestures can be seen as a start. It can be seen as a start. The question is, are we prepared to do more than? Or will we, in a few years, just go back the way we were? And that's the challenge. Black Lives Matter, many people jumped up and down and said, oh, people are being woke. And by the way, I really feel so strongly when people talk about woke in such a negative way, because woke, actually used correctly, it is about Black people saying to each other, wake up. And smell the coffee beans, as it were. Look and see what's happening. So the reality is, we're saying people matters. And I hope that those who took the knees, and even those, my views with regards to statues is, I don't want to see things pulled down, although it might be that some may need to come down. My preference is to see a plaque that actually says this person got their money from enslaving people. So we can hold that. So, and we can think about that and think about ourselves. But the true underlying thing for me in all of this is, can we attempt to stand in the other's shoe? Because if we are to do this, then we will know and how uncomfortable that is. And we will begin to say, this is not right. I would not want that for my child, so I will not wish it on that person. The good that I want for my child, my family, that I will want to see for others. And if we could just do that, my goodness, what a different world we would have.
Yeah, and again, that reflects not only loving your neighbor as yourself, but also the golden rule of certainly the New Testament, and probably the Old Testament, is, treat others as you would have them treat you.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Now, you came to the UK when you were 18. How have attitudes and behaviours towards non-white people in this country changed, do you think? I mean, well, what do you experience now, or what did you experience when you were 18 that you don't experience now in terms of discrimination or prejudice?
I think there is more awareness, but there's one thing having the awareness. The question is, will it make a difference in terms of how you behave? But there is clearly more awareness. I must tell you that all my time being in Britain, the only time I've ever been shouted at on the streets and told to go back to Africa,
right?
So, was during Brexit.
Yeah.
Now, what is interesting, a thought did occur to me at the time, should I ask him which country in Africa he would like me to go to, since that's not where I come from. But so you see those extremes. So things lie dormant. Things lie dormant. What I want us to do is to interrogate ourselves. When I confirm young people, I say to them, you are now the light of Christ. what I want you to do when you are at home and you hear your grandparents or great-grandparents or auntie or uncle so-and-so make derogatory remarks about refugees, asylum seekers, homeless people, or Black people and pink people, I want you to say to them, I wonder what Jesus would think about that. You know, I want you to get the courage respectfully just to ask that question so that we can begin the dialogue. And as you said at the beginning, or your colleague said at the beginning, conversing, you know, the ability to be able to change each other as we stay in conversation together.
We have been educated to a lesser or greater extent about, you know, Britain's colonial past, about how, you know, many of our big cities have got the fantastic buildings that they do, or the institutions that they do because of the slave trade. In fact, the church itself is not immune from accusation here that it's benefited historically from money.
Not an accusation, it's real.
Oh, well, I was, yeah, thank you. So, you know, how, if we're to make more than gestures, you know, how far should we be going? Yes, educating for the future, but what about the past? Should this country that has benefited massively and historically and for many, many years from enslaving and mistreating people, should Britain be making reparation for its colonial mistakes?
I think I'm going to respond by saying, what do we mean by reparations? For me, it is more than expecting someone to say, I'm sorry. It is more than, you know, I'm going to hand every Black person or every African £500. You know, that's irrelevant. What I want, what would be real reparations for me is that the countries engaged in the enslaving others would first of all acknowledge it, acknowledge their past and say, this was heinous, and also to acknowledge that what they did then has led to the kind of racism that we have today. It was born from there. And those who are younger now, you know, 300 or so years later, who don't know why they feel that they are superior to Black people or pink people, or, you know, they don't know because they've not been taught. They've heard about William Wilberforce, that he tried to abolish it, but nobody talked about the Holocaust of Black people who were taken brutally from Africa and taken to the Americas and to the Caribbean and enslaved in a dreadful way. They were things, they were not people. And so what I want in terms of reparation is an acknowledgement and to own that happened, and for them to teach their children that this is what we did, and actually we lied to you. And the monies that we made, I mean, it wasn't until I believe I'm thinking of the previous Prime Minister before Theresa May,
David Cameron.
I believe his family was still getting money that slave owners were given for having abolished slavery. So those
that was a great injustice and inequality, wasn't it? When there was compensation, it wasn't to the downtrodden, it was to the oppressor.
Absolutely, it was to those who were oppressing and enslaving, that they and their families. So they only recently, it may have been 2015, if I'm not mistaken, that they had the last of the payment that was promised to them. And so we were then left constantly poor. Africa was left poor. Africa, one of the richest continents in natural resources, is the poorest. And we ask why. And so I would want to see a commitment in terms of reparations where the infrastructure in those countries are rebuilt, where their, education, for example, is supported, and so that people can have their families and the natural resources that they have, a commitment for the West to stop taking from Africa, going in with their companies and in the name of capitalism, and still taking from that country. And then when things get bad and those people try to come here, we pull up the drawbridge. Oh no, this is our country.
Right.
You can't come here, after Britain has been traveling round and round the world and owning it.
Yeah. We'll come to them in a minute. I knew we'd have a few things to chat about. Bishop Rose, you're a member of the Archbishop's Council for Racial Justice. Is it the case that white Britain doesn't see white immigrants?
That's difficult in the sense that, I remember Nigel Farage saying that he was on a train and he heard accents and other languages being spoken and felt that, he was not at home, or words to that effect.
Mind you, you could go to the north, you could go to the northeast and not understand the accent, couldn't you?
That is true.
To all our friends in Newcastle,
I didn't understand my grandmother-in-law for quite a while when I first met her. No, I think the problem is, and when we saw the Ukraine war that was going on in Ukraine, and how Britain, and I am so glad that they did this. It was the right thing to do. They said welcome. But if there was an African country having war, we wouldn't say welcome. We've never said welcome.
There's not been peace in Sudan for many years. For example.
And nobody has said welcome from the West, so to speak. So there, I guess there is some level of that. And, people may have to name that however they want to name it. But what I see is a two-tiered system. If you're Black or brown or from Islamic tradition, then you will probably be sent to, which country was it they were going to send people to?
Rwanda.
That's the name. Yeah. So that's a two-tiered system that I see, and that's wrong. However way we look at it.
Yes. Do you then, as a Christian leader and a person of influence, do you perceive that there is a Christian answer or a Christian approach to immigration?
There has to be a Christian approach to immigration. What we have to say, I'm reminded of the feeding of the 5,000. In the feeding of the 5,000, the disciples said to Jesus, look, they came to hear you speak. They have heard you. Don't concern yourself with whether they are hungry, whether they're going to faint on the way home. But we're told in that passage that Jesus had compassion. And so for me, the Christian response has to be compassionate. Show mercy. Deal with what presents itself first. And then you can go into start thinking about, what are the social structures? Right now, the people are drowning. No, we do not pull them back out to sea. No, we do not criminalize them. They've had a terrible journey to get here. We don't lock them up and behave as if they have done something criminally wrong. What we do, we show compassion, but at the same time, we attend to their needs. I think what is interesting from my perspective also is that this is not a British problem. This is a world problem. People are moving from their homes. And we need to be asking ourselves, there ought to be an international group of people working on this. Why are people moving? We can't just pick people up at the end downstream and say, oh, people are jumping in the river. We need to go upstream and find out why they're jumping in. So why are people leaving their homes? Are they leaving because of war, because of poverty, because of famine, because of climate change, because of civil unrest, because of oppressive regime? Why are they leaving? And what are we going to do about it as a United Nations together, who live in one world, instead of playing political football with France and turning around, saying we want to stop we want to break the model of those who are carrying people. So we can't break it, so we join them by smuggling people to Rwanda. That is ridiculous.
You are now the Bishop of Dover. Many of your constituents voted in their thousands for Brexit. One of the arguments for the Leave campaign was the notion of taking back control of the national borders. In the 12 months ending June 23, there were some 46,000 people have arrived on shores close to you in the southeast. They have arrived across Channel in small boats. You speak passionately about compassion, and you eloquently describe some of the circumstances that actually bring people into a rubber dinghy across the treacherous channel. The reality is that more people put extra strain on local facilities such as health, education, work, housing. So how realistic is it for you to expect those people who feel their way of life, is under threat by the incomers? How realistic is it for you to invite them to love their incoming neighbour?
Oh, it is very realistic if we are following the pattern of Jesus. Very realistic. If we're not following the pattern of Jesus, and we are simply, ordinary human beings living in this world, then that's a different picture. But because I am a child of God, it means that I believe that we're all God's children. It also means that I believe that this is one world, God's world, not mine to possess, but God's world. And therefore, we need to work at finding the answers. We need to ask ourselves, what if that was me coming from those countries where these people come from? I saw two people being interviewed when we had the drownings near Greece.
Yes.
Two people were interviewed. I heard one man ask, why do you keep risking your lives like this? And he looked straight at the person interviewing him and he said, because I am hungry and my people are hungry. And as I'm a little bit younger, it was felt that I'm the one who is to make the journey. Then maybe I can get some work and then I can start sending money back to help my people. Another young man who was in Germany, he said that he left and risked his life because there was nothing left for him in Syria. Nothing. His hometown had been devastated. Now in Germany, he's going to university, and no doubt he will do well and he will support his family. So I think what we need to, it is because we don't see those people as human beings. We see them as nothing. Why we behave the way we behave to them as nations in the West. And it breaks my heart, because you are right. It impacts, and I know full well, I've spoken to some of our local politicians, who says we can't take anymore. We can't, and they shouldn't have to, because that's where they rock up on the shores. The country is bigger than that. But also just think about it. They talked about spending millions on hotel places. Somebody is making a profit from that. Somebody is making a profit from those millions under the banner of capitalism. The millions that we've given to Rwanda, the millions that we've given to France, Surely it would have been better for us to work with other countries to see how we can invest in those countries in order to make life better for them. No one in their right minds want to leave their warm country to come to freezing cold Europe. No one in their right mind.
Not unless they got good cause.
I am here because my husband happens to be English.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I would be in Montego Bay, Jamaica.
Yeah.
That's where I would be. So, you know, we've cut 0.7 GDP. We've cut that we used to give to development.
Yeah.
You know, we've got to think more strategically about how we help our brothers and sisters. And with climate change coming up, we're going to see much more movements of people.
It's going to get worse, isn't it?
Yeah.
Let's change tack before we turn to our viewers' questions, because we've got lots rolling in here, and please keep them coming. Bishop Rose, you have worked again through your calling, through your ministry. You've worked up close and personal with women at the very height of the establishment. Members of Parliament, Prime Minister Theresa May, peers, members of the royal family, Her Majesty the Queen. According to the 21 national survey census, women are the majority of the UK population. Something around 51% of the UK's population is female. Yet women are often treated as though they were in the minority, or as a minority. To what extent do women face daily discrimination?
I believe that women do face daily discrimination. And one of the danger in all of this is that those of us who are not directly impacted on, we actually tell ourselves and tell each other and tell the world, oh, that's nonsense. If they want to, they can do this. Because we think, you know, it's a sort of, I'm all right, Jack. And we leave others out. And sometimes I also find that women themselves can be hugely instrumental in discriminating against other women.
Yes.
It is there.
Yes.
You know, I watched the film The Woman King, and in it, the Woman King said, if you want to keep people in chains, you must first convince them that they are meant to be bound. If you want to keep people in chains, you must first convince them that they're meant to be bound. Our women in this country needs to be liberated. I'm reminded of the Bob Marley song, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can change our minds. You know, so yes, women are still, and actually, I'm ashamed to say that the church is a big leader on this as well, in discriminating against women. Only we try to wrap it up in theological language and say, oh no, it's not discrimination. It's just a theological, doctrinal, biblical, what nonsense.
My last question then, Rose, before we come to our viewers, the question tonight is, who then is my neighbour? What's your answer?
Who is my neighbour? My neighbour has got to be the world that I come in contact with. You know, whether I come in contact with seeing them on my screen being brutalized, whether I see them, I see it happening on the street corner, whether I hear of it happening in Timbuktu, that is my neighbor. And I must speak for them. And I must advocate for them. I must be what the children in our schools speak of. I must become a courageous advocate for all who are being brutalized, or all who are vulnerable. I was hungry and thirsty, you gave me no food, no drink. I was sick in prison, you didn't visit me. I was naked, you didn't clothe me. Lord, when did we see you? Inasmuch as you haven't done it to these, you haven't done it to me. So the world is my neighbor, because after all, it is God's world. It's not mine to put lock and key on and, you know, have a fight with somebody else about, don't come on my bit. It's God's.
And you say it's your responsibility, but it's the church's responsibility as well. It's everybody who...
It's everybody's responsibility. And in particular for those of us who proclaim faith. That's the difference. You know, I might not be able to challenge someone who has no faith, you know, because, but from a faith perspective, those of us who profess faith, then we have to live into that faith.
But I think even as a person of faith, as a spiritual Christian leader, people do look, you know, I mean, over the years, people have said there's no moral guidance in this country anymore, you know, and they might point to a bishop in the past who didn't believe in the resurrection, or allegedly didn't believe in the resurrection, and say, well, look, the church isn't leading us. But actually, people do, I think there's still people who do look from outside of the church towards the church for spiritual and moral guidance on these things, isn't there?
Oh, yes. But you see, what I'm thrilled about, when Jesus gave his imagery of the Last Judgment, he wasn't talking about any personalized moral stuff. He wasn't talking about whether people stole, which is wrong, or whether they cheated, which is wrong, or lied. It was actually about how we treat our neighbors. How we treat our neighbors. You know, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, mind. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. And you know, frankly, I think if we're busy doing that, we won't have time to do the other things that gets us into trouble.
Sure. Okay. Well, let's see if I can get you into trouble now, because I'm going to ask you some viewers' questions.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. And this is ranging across our conversation tonight, and we might find something that is not even tangential. But let's have a look. The Christian faith says this viewer: the Christian faith in the West has been so white. Jesus has usually been shown with blue eyes for centuries. Why has that happened, and how do we gain a new vision of God for our times?
I went to Madagascar this summer, and in one of the cathedrals that I went to, right in the middle of the church, you know, at the east end, on the wall, massive imagery of a white Jesus. And I said, what on earth is he doing up there? I said to them, what is he doing? I
hope you didn't pull the image down.
Well, I couldn't, because it's painted on the wall.
Okay.
Perhaps if it wasn't, I would have snuck it out. But I did say to them, you know, you've got great artists here. You know, you don't need to have that white image of Jesus there. But you see, when the missionaries went abroad, they didn't just take the Christian faith; they took their culture with them. That's it. They took their culture with them. And we need to, in today's age, we need to, you know, if I'm made in the image of God, then God looks like me. And you know, and that's great. That's terrific. And God looks like you because you're also made in the image of God. So I think in those countries, they need to redefine, remake those images.
Right. Well, here's one then. You'll have the answer to this one. Jesus had 12 men as his disciples in the New Testament. Why didn't he choose 6 women and 6 men?
Well, you know, Jesus was working within his cultural context, and good man too. He worked within his cultural context. We're being asked to work within our cultural context. And we're not doing that. We are stuck. We are stuck.
And where in the next question then? Right. And the thing about this little section is you never know what's coming in. It's fantastic. Where in the Bible do you draw most inspiration on the issue of welcoming the stranger? I mean, my
goodness,
you find, like, you know, you've been taken back to love the Lord thy God and love your neighbor yourself a lot. You speak about compassion a lot.
In the Old Testament, there are several places in the Old Testament where we read, when you go out to do the gleaning, don't pick up everything. Leave the things around the edges for the the orphans and the widows and the
Yeah.
aliens.
Yeah. Yeah.
In Leviticus, not a book that I enjoy reading, but in Leviticus 19, be holy as I am holy. And the holiness was not any ritualistic stuff to do with church. The holiness was actually about how we treat those who are most vulnerable in society.
Mm.
And of course, we know in the New Testament, yes. So there's no one bit. And I love Ruth. I love the book of
Yes.
Ruth.
Yes.
I love her compassion for her mother-in-law, who said,
Yeah.
"Look, I'm not going to have any more sons for you to marry."
Yes. Yes.
I love, whither thou goest, I will go. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God, my God.
And of course, her heritage is not she's not from Judah. She's a foreigner. She's from the other side of Jordan. She's from Moab.
Oh yes. And she ends up being in the birth line of our Lord and Savior Jesus.
She's in the Gospels. Yeah.
Yes.
Another question then, and so many here. I've got to pick one out. Okay, let's talk on the subject of immigration. How do you relate to Christians? I mean, you said earlier that your influence is mainly within people of faith, or you would hope that you would challenge them. How do you relate to Christians who take a strong negative line on immigration, who aren't as welcoming as you are, or that you would like them to be?
I would want to challenge them, not to pattern what I do, but to pattern our Lord Jesus. I am striving always to be a disciple of Christ, a follower, a learner. That's all I'm striving to be. And so I would be challenging them, not to think about what I'm saying, but to think about what would Jesus have to say about this, and get their answer from that.
When you pray, Bishop Rose, in your personal devotions, when you pray to God, do you see God? You mentioned earlier, we are made in his image. Do you see him as male or female? Do you address him as... Oh, sorry. I'm finding myself in linguistic trouble here.
Yes.
Do you find God, do you see God as male or as female? Do you address the divinity in female language or not?
That's quite interesting, because, I've grown up saying, "Our Father who art in heaven." And actually, I don't have a problem with that. I don't have any anxiety doing that. But I'm also consciously aware that the Holy Spirit is often referred to in the female pronoun. Again, I have no problem with that. So, I don't see a little man sitting there when I'm praying at all. I am praying soul to soul. And, and sometimes I use father, sometimes I use mother, and I'm sure Jesus honors that. Our Lord honors that.
Because true worship is spirit.
Absolutely.
And truth.
Spirit and in truth.
Yeah. You've been involved in inner city work where the discrepancy between the very rich and the very poor are very stark. What is your vision for equality within British society?
I long for, I was quite disappointed recently when our government, I believe, changed the bankers' bonus. That they, at a time when people who are not bankers and who are not earning what bankers earn, my daughter is a doctor, and and they were out on strike earlier this year, and she says, "Mommy, this is not me saying I want more money. It is saying, I'm saying by going out on strike, Mommy, there are not enough doctors. We are being stretched. We want our conditions to improve so that more people can work, and we are not stressed and leave the profession. So I want to see a more equal society. I want to see a society where we care for one another, where we don't, those who have more than they need, I think have a responsibility to share what they have. Or those who are in charge of industries or, employers, they need not to be taking more out of the business. They need to ensure that their employers can feed their children. etc. When I was in the East London and I saw children, my primary school children on the street, and at 8 o'clock at night, what are you doing out here?
Yeah.
Oh, why aren't you at home? Nobody's at home, miss. And so I check up, and it's true, nobody's at home, because mother, and it's usually a single mother is doing 2 and 3 and 4 jobs, and it's all low paid, low paid.
Yeah.
So that's a problem. I've just come back from Madagascar. There, I also saw extremes, and I felt, as I do here, a sense of rage about that. Because I think we need to do better. And the more we have what we do, we build walls.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of the story of the man whose crops did well. And Jesus told the story, his crops did well. And instead of saying, wow, I'll be able to share more with what I have, he said, I'm going to build bigger barns.
Yeah.
And he was told, tonight your soul is required of you.
Yeah. Next question then. This is taking you back to earlier in your ministry, to your time as chaplain to the Speaker of the House of Commons. What influence were you able to have on politicians, members of the government, as chaplain to the Speaker of the House of Commons?
I always said to the press at the time that I am the politician's chaplain. I'm their pastor, so that you would never find me in the media being critical of them in that setting. I much preferred, and I think how I operated then, pardon me, was as a Nathan. You remember the story in the Old Testament where David lusted after Bathsheba, sent Bathsheba's husband Uriah to the hottest part of the battle so that he could die. Well, the prophet Nathan said to the king, let me tell you the story about 2 men. One is very poor, but he loves this little lamb, treats this lamb as his child. The others have so many and lots. And yet when he had a visitor, it was the poor man's lamb that he took and killed for the feast. And the king was enraged. I want to know who it is that did that. And Nathan quietly said, you are that man. And we know it, we see in Psalm, I think it's Psalm 51, where he is penitential about what he did. So I think that I did speak into a number of things, several things with parliamentarians, getting alongside them and speaking to them. It was interesting when I did Question Time. I think it was when I did Question Time. I heard one of the MPs in the green room saying, oh, whatever Rose, we didn't like when Rose came into the chamber, because when Rose came into the chamber, we knew we had to behave ourselves.
I know the feeling tonight. I'm on my best behavior. Let's move to another subject then. This is about opportunity. This is about young people, and it's about discrimination against girls. A viewer tonight, I read it. I am the father of a daughter, a strong, independent, intelligent girl of 5 going on 15. I delight in seeing her flourish in the opportunities she's able to take advantage of. But even at 5, she's encountering barriers being put in place by the cultural patriarchy. She'll encounter these more as she grows. She'll have questions such as, why do they say I can't? Why is that activity only for boys? We will always encourage her and be her biggest cheerleader. We would love your thoughts on ways to explain this unfair world and how we can help defend her against the oppression of women. So you're being asked for your advice.
Yes, I think that we need to grow our girls up to know that they can become. And even if they can't see it, that they might become the first to show that it can be done, as long as it is something in their heart that they want to pursue. And we need to grow our boys up too, to respect their sisters and their mothers and their aunties, and to seek the best for them and not to limit themselves. One of my favorite songs is, the higher you build your barrier, the taller I become. You know, whatever the barriers in the way, we're simply going to go over them, around them. We're going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's part of that song. We're
Yeah.
going to do it anyway. You know,
Yeah.
so yes, I think we need to be cheerleaders to our daughters and our girls and tell them, yes, they can. Yes, they can. To give them confidence, encourage them, and actually be courageous advocates on their behalf until they are equipped and able themselves to speak on their behalf, challenging injustices.
On the subject of discrimination against women, then a viewer says, how do you view the texts in the New Testament that seem to discriminate against women in leadership? Perhaps they're thinking of where the Apostle Paul talks about women should be silent in church. I think there's a letter, one of the pastoral letters speaks about a bishop should be the husband of one wife. It doesn't say the wife of one husband.
Sure,
So
exactly.
do you feel, first of all, do you feel that the New Testament is discriminatory in its language about women?
It is speaking in its own context. And you know, I have to remind myself about that so as not to get annoyed with Paul. You know, he was speaking in his own context, and he has a right to speak in his own context. You know, he does not speak for me. He does not speak to me about that. That is his context. That was right for him. May have been right for them then, but you know, it's not right for me now. It's not right for today. We're in a different time.
Yeah, and it's a bit like those Radio 4 extra programs that if they put on an old comedy from the 70s, they say, you know, the views expressed represent an earlier culture. And is that the same way that you would look at, say, you know, Paul's teaching in the New Testament? That would be the attitude
the same way I
of
would,
the
you know,
time.
there are certain things that definitely can be reduced to that cultural setting. There are other things such as the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace. Those are, you know, those live on. But in terms of the cultural thing, that women should be tied to the sink, then he can keep that. And I will definitely have, you know, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, and peace.
Thank you. Bishop Rose, it's been a delight to speak with you. May you know joy, love, and peace.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
My guest today has been the Right Reverend Rose Hudson-Wilkin, CD MBE.